Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. I'm Marta Ferguson. This is Marta's Sci-Fi Seminar. This is our 9th video about drafting your first novel. If you're a subscriber and you've been watching the videos as they come out, or if you've been just kind of viewing them at your leisure on their intended schedule, which is about every 2 weeks, then you may be as far as 40,000 words, which is fantastic. That's like 2/3 of the way there. That's the kind of top bar for most novella kinds of considerations. So 40,000 words is a huge amount of territory to already have covered. So you are to be most congratulated. And keep up the momentum, keep writing. I know, I keep saying it, but it keeps being true. At this point, you just have to keep going. It is absolutely downhill from here. Keep moving forward, go back to your brainstorming, go back to your outlining as you need to, keep tracking your scenes, keep figuring out where all the pieces fit together. You can do this. I believe you can do this. So, hang in there, stay with it. The element of style we're going to talk about today is a big one. It's not always included in the sort of classical consideration of the elements of style, but I think it's a really important one. The word we're going to talk about is structure as it applies to books. It's the kind of thing that comes up in almost every book club discussion. What did you think of the structure of the book? And I'm just really not sure that people who ask or people who answer in book club contexts necessarily mean the same thing one to the other. Like, they probably both have an idea what they're talking about, but they might not either of them really understand what the other's asking or saying because it's a very slippery term. Other words for structure that might feel a little less slippery are words like construction, order, arrangement, flow, and the one that I will talk about a little bit more specifically is formula. So what did you think of really, if we can sum up plot as what happens in the story, we can sum up structure as the order in which those things happen in the story, or the order in which the plot is given to us, which may or may not specifically be chronological order. Okay? We talked a little bit about unreliable narrators. Having an unreliable narrator can help dictate the structure of the book, because an unreliable narrator is often an unstable narrator. So if you've got an unreliable narrator who's starting to fall apart, oh hey, the structure of your book is going to start to fall apart along with that narrative voice. To give you some structure examples, there are a lot of kind of standard structures, and we tend to call those formulas. In fact, we tend to call those formulas for all kinds of fiction, including literary fiction. But people tend to be very judgmental about any book that they think of as following a formula, and yet almost every book does. Unless you're doing experimental work, you've got a beginning, middle, and end. There's only a certain amount of ways that book can be put together and make sense. Now, obviously, we just touched on two of the ways that can go. It can be chronological. The author gives us the events of the story in the order that they happen, or something can be put together such that we get those events out of order, okay? And particularly in science fiction, there can be lots of reasons that we get those events not in a standard chronological pattern. We might be working from the end back to the beginning. We might be working in flashbacks. which are those scenes where you have a character in the middle of doing something that remembers something else, or maybe we're just handed a scene that we understand to be from a prior time. Okay? One of the kind of popular structures right now is to start in medias res, or in the middle of the action. And then we get bits of what has brought us to that point, and then we go forward from that point. So that's something that really shakes up any chronological formula. There are also some pretty standard ways that a book can be put together. A quest certainly is the classic fantasy structure. Something needs to be found, somebody needs to find it. There will be complications along the way. So that's a long time favorite fantasy structure, and it often gets borrowed into science fiction to great effect also. The mystery, or the police procedural, which of course is the core of the mystery genre, and I discussed more extensively on the sister channel to this one, the sibling channel, Marta's Magical Mystery Class. But that classic mystery structure, death has occurred and an investigation must follow. Okay? Certainly science fiction is full of all kinds of procedurals. We call those procedurals if we're sticking close to the police, maybe mysteries if we're not sticking as close to the official investigation, cozy if we're sticking close to an amateur sleuth who is poking around. So yeah, there are all of those sorts of structures that also work very well in science fiction. But really, when we're talking about structure, we're talking about how everything fits together. We're also talking about kind of this exchange that happens between author and reader. Part of the structure of a book is the timing of information. Like in theory, the author, maybe not writing the first draft of the book, but an author, by the time the book has been revised multiple times, edited, put out for publication, the author knows more about what's going to happen than we know about what's going to happen. So part of the structure of a book is built around its reveals, okay? And that's, again, that borrows some from mystery, but it's also very true of even the earliest science fiction. Because science fiction is always about asking questions. Science fiction, I say always, I'm sure you can now come up with 10 examples that are not about asking questions. But let's just say, in general, science fiction being the literature of ideas, science fiction being the literature of the thought experiment, science fiction often asks us a lot of questions. One of the questions it asks a lot is, what if? So part of what happens in a lot of science fiction is we get an author's answer to the question, what if? But the answer isn't necessarily given to us in the first chapter. Often, that information, that exploration, is parceled out to us in pieces. If it's a good book, the author probably started it to answer that question for themselves. And we are getting in on that wonder of exploration also. It's kind of a cranky writer who really wants to mess with us. It's somebody who knew the answer when they got started and just really thought they would irritate us. You know, sometimes those books are fun too. But in general, I do stick with the adage, no surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader. So for me, if somebody is being false about exploring something, it's going to feel false in the book. If somebody's being genuine about exploring something, we get that classic science fiction sense of wonder. Okay? Those kinds of effects are often generated by the structure of the book. Now, if we kind of look at how does structure fit with the other elements of fiction that we've talked about, character and world building maybe don't affect structure so much. And again, there are going to be exceptions to that, particularly here in science fiction. But structure, we're really also talking about the pacing of the story, how fast it goes. We're definitely talking about the plot and how we get the pieces of the plot. We're talking about the point of view in the book or the perspective. We're talking about maybe even the narrator's voice. Like I said, with an unreliable narrator, that certainly has a lot of impact on the structure of the book. So it's those kinds of things together that make the structure of the book kind of, those things all go together to create the structure of the book. And there are other bits and pieces of things also. Structure is one of those things you might consider an emergent property. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts kind of thing, where you stick all this stuff together and then something happens that's different than all the stuff was individually. It's like baking. You know, you stick all the ingredients together, heat is the catalyst, and boom, you have something different. So structure, you might think of as a catalyst for bringing all these different things together and creating this story as we know it, or perhaps structure is the end result of bringing all those things together. And the author is the catalyst? I'm not sure. I think I've gotten lost in my own metaphor, which, you know, occupational hazard. But I do hope that I have given you some more clarity rather than less clarity about what we mean when we talk about the structure of a book. So the last thing I need to do here is give you your recommendation for the week. Very excited about this. I've leaned a lot into young adult lit lately. I'm not sure if it's just because a lot of young adult books are shorter and I'm juggling a lot right now, or if I'm just really kind of feeling drawn into these coming of age narratives because there are a lot of, you know, we are all coming of age in the era of COVID or what have you. But I highly recommend Nnedi Okorafor's Binti Trilogy. Binti's a pretty amazing character. I love character-driven fiction. The first of the Binti series is all about leaving for college. Only in Binti's case, it's college on a different planet. And as there often are in coming-of-age narratives, where we see people taking those first steps out of their childhoods into their new adult lives or young adult lives or their college lives, there are complications. And in Binti's case, those complications are major. It's a book that has a lot to say about trauma, recovery, forgiveness, resilience, beautifully written. Okorafor, if you have never read her work before, is really amazing. She was an athlete in her youth, and injury kept her from pursuing sports as a primary life goal, but that athletic discipline has all transferred into her writing discipline, and she is incredibly prolific. She was a writer and professor for many years. I believe she is now writing full-time now, and wow, she has... I keep thinking, God, I've got to read more Okorafor, because there just keeps being more to read. She's really and truly amazing, and Binti is a great place to start to get to know her work. So, highly recommended. Keep reading, keep writing, And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.